And now, the First Alert Storm Team, live from the 13 Now digital desk. This is Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Mariana Toyota.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Tropic Topics, a weekly discussion on what exactly is going on in the tropics. And as you know by now, we are still dealing with Fred down in the Caribbean, and a lot of changes have come over the past several days, and there's still a lot to dig into when it comes to this tropical system. And we're going to discuss all of it right here on Tropic Topics this afternoon, including that forecast path and potential impacts to Northwest Florida. We're going to go over to Ross, who's actually in studio, and he's going to give us the latest analysis on what is now tropical depression. Fred, Ross?
Absolutely. We're going to break it down here and wanted to come to the map so that we could set the stage as to what is going on, so that when we do talk about potential impacts to our area, that we can actually talk about the specifics in the atmosphere and the reasons for it. Because I always like to equate tropical systems are a pinball in a massive game, and we're trying to predict about 12 moves from now. So bouncing off all the bumpers, the walls, other paddles, that kind of thing. And we're trying to predict where the ball is going to be further down the road. So you need to know what is going on in the atmosphere and the overall stage, and that's what we're looking at here. This is the water vapor, the oranges representing dry air, the greens representing moist air. So there's not a lot of dry air in front of this system, and if you can pick out where Fred is, which is right in the middle of this map, then hats off to you, because this is a very weak and disorganized system at this point in time. So we're going to start to draw these things in here, and there's a lot going on. You may notice you're hearing some rumble of thunder and things like that outside here in the Panhandle, or you probably had a thunderstorm already. That's because there's an upper level low that's hanging out right here. You'll see that the wind is going in that direction in the upper atmosphere, and then on the backside you got the wind going in this direction. This is going to cause what we refer to as vertical wind shear. So remember, tropical systems from the surface, if this is the surface, from the surface up to the upper levels, want to have a stacked column, so they want to be vertical. If you have vertical wind shear, that starts to tilt the column, and that makes it harder for the system to strengthen. Well, Fred is right about right here where you see that little piece of moisture that is hanging out. There's not a ton of spin left with it, but there is a mid-level circulation there, and that is what we are tracking, is that mid-level circulation. We're going to be waiting to see if deep convection can develop around that mid-level circulation and then pull back down to the center. So Hispaniola did its job. It ripped it apart, and a little bit of wind shear is also keeping this weak. This is expected to move toward the Florida Straits, but there's a possibility that we get a center relocation. That could happen anywhere over Cuba, or that could happen over deeper convection to the north. If that's the case, we get deeper convection to the north, then we're obviously going to have bigger implications in the track going into the future. There's other things going on as well. There's a high pressure system hanging out over the Atlantic. This is our subtropical high. There's a Tut low that's hanging out right here as well. So there's some vertical wind shear that is off into the distance there, and then you've got some vertical wind shear out ahead of it. But this upper level low playing the biggest impact on the potential for this system, because it's going to be pulled toward that system. Our upper level low should move just slightly off to the north as we go through the next couple of days, and in total that means that whether we have a system here or here is really going to change what we're talking about as far as what the system is going to look like down the road, because it's either going to be coming across the peninsula toward the Panhandle, or it's going to be going in open water toward the peninsula. And obviously there's still some surprise factors here. So we do know that there is going to be shear involved with this. We do know that it is moving in our direction. What we don't know is how quickly this system develops, whether it's over open water, whether it's able to take advantage of being over open water, or if this upper level low is just going to kind of absorb it. And in that case, we're probably talking about very minimal impact. So scenarios at this point in time look like we're probably talking anywhere from nothing at all, meaning we just have some enhanced moisture around for our typical summertime storms, or possibly all the way up to a Category 1 hurricane. That's really the range of possibilities here. So either nothing, where we're talking about no impact whatsoever, or we could be talking about minimal impact. And yes, I know Category 1 hurricane sounds scary, but in reality, we can all deal with a Category 1 hurricane. That's pretty much a severe thunderstorm, just a little more intense and a little more time intensive as it does come through. But that's basically the equivalent of a severe thunderstorm as far as the Category 1 hurricane goes. And this is going to be eastern lopsided as well. So that is the stage of what we're talking about. I'm going to go to a more traditional view here so that you can see what I'm talking about as far as the satellite imagery, and this will make a little more sense looking at the satellite imagery as far as what's out there. So the water vapor gives you a good idea of spins and swirls. The enhanced satellite gives you a good idea of where the cloud cover actually is, and you'll notice a little bit of swirl that's left over here. That is Fred. That's Tropical Depression Fred, and obviously all the convection that we have going on there. So I'm going to throw it back to Kristen. I'm going to come over there and join her, and we're going to go through all of the possible solutions and how this could potentially impact our area. And again, we're going from minimal to no impacts whatsoever, possibly all the way up to a Category 1. At the moment, the models lean much more toward the weaker solutions than they do the strong ones. Kristen?
Yeah, thank you, Ross, for that analysis. So this is something that we've been continuing to track for days now. In fact, early as last week, we saw that tropical wave developing and knew it was going to cause some problems for us. And one of those biggest problems has unfortunately been the forecast, because as Ross has mentioned, we could see absolutely nothing to, at the most, a Category 1 hurricane, which again, it sounds scary, but the impacts will be pretty low across the Panhandle. And thankfully, if it even is a Category 1 hurricane, those impacts not necessarily the highest for us here. So kind of one thing we've been watching lately is the model trends, and they are trending weaker at this time. But as we all know, tropical systems can change pretty quickly, and there's still a lot of ingredients still in play that would lead to either an increased forecast potential or a decrease as well. So we're going to go in and talk about what some of those latest analysis looks like and some of those potential forecast paths for you. What we're seeing now is not only, well, let me go back there. Do we have Fred out there, which of course is our main concern, but behind Fred, there's also another tropical wave, which an indicator that yes, we are seeing more activity across the tropics now. We are getting closer to the peak of hurricane season, which comes in middle September. That wave behind Fred given about a 60% chance of development within the next 5 days. So we're going to have to be continuing to monitor this tropical development in the tropics over the next several days. But of course, Fred does look to be the main concern at this time. Ross has discussed what's kind of happened with Fred. Again, it was a tropical storm yesterday, but it's moved over the island of Hispaniola, which has a very mountainous terrain, and that is why it's been very much so shredded at this point. The circulation is well off of where the convection is building, and it looks like that area of the circulation is pushing along the coast of Cuba, and just towards the north of it is where we do have a little bit more of a spin and circulation. There's actually potential that it could start to redevelop in that area as we continue over the next couple of days. So here's the very latest on Fred coming from the National Hurricane Center. Its winds around 35 miles per hour, tracking towards the west-northwest at around 14 miles per hour. It's forecast to stay as a tropical depression at least for the next 24 hours, but it may redevelop into a tropical storm as we continue into, say, late Friday afternoon, even possibly early Saturday, making its way into the Straits of Florida. At that point, again, as Ross has mentioned, it could either go along the peninsula or out into the open Gulf, which would then lead to two very different scenarios, either a stronger storm or a weaker storm. And it does look like that will have some sort of impact here across northwest Florida, but it's either going to be very little or, again, at the most, a Category 1. The timing of it looks to be about Sunday night into Monday morning, and it should be relatively quick moving. So by Monday afternoon into Tuesday morning, we really shouldn't have any more impacts from this system.
Yeah, I will note that in this current view here, you'll notice the National Hurricane Center really is going at the highest end of intensity and the intensity range. So that's what they're showing. And I think that that is smart here because there is some kind of surprise factor to this storm. While most of the modeling is much weaker than even what the National Hurricane Center is presenting, there is still some modeling out there that is suggesting that this could try to strengthen into a minimal Category 1 hurricane. as it is pressing into shore. Now, obviously, in that scenario, that means that shear doesn't have much of an impact on it, and we're probably talking about a very narrow area on the eastern side of the circulation that has the most intense winds, and likely 55, maybe 60 mile per hour winds, even if we are talking about a Category 1 at that point in time, because you have to keep in mind that this is going to be a relatively small system, and we're also going to be talking about the fact that this is going to be dealing with wind shear as well as that upper level low, as I already addressed. So even in worst case scenario, we're probably talking about minor impacts overall to our area, with a narrow area seeing more significant impacts. Now, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be a major event by any means, and we're certainly not saying that this is going to be greater than a Category 1 hurricane. That is the top end line of the range of possibilities here. It's more likely that we have something at or weaker than what the National Hurricane Center has, which is a 60 mile per hour tropical storm, because that's where the majority of the modeling is. But it is certainly possible that we see all the way up to a Category 1. What we do know, what has been narrowed down here, is that we do know the storm is going to come into our area. It may be the Bend, it might be all the way west to Mobile. Those are still possibilities. And with as small of a system as this is inevitably going to be, that has significant changes in the forecast depending on location, because like I said, it's going to be a narrow area of impacts that do see impacts, if we see impacts at all. So as Kristen mentioned, there is a range of possibilities, and we're going to try to break those down here. So obviously, coming off of Hispaniola, this has been very weak, and as shown last night, a weaker system would trend west, and we have been seeing that very much verified. And as Kristen also pointed out, we could see a center relocation with this under any deeper convection, so that really allows for any of these scenarios to still be in play, which means if we get a center redevelopment closer to the Bahamas on the north side of this cone, then that would really much that would pretty much take us out of any kind of significant impacts whatsoever, any eastern shift in the track at all, and we see nothing. I mean, very little rain, very little wind, very little waves, other than maybe some drier air. Think back to Elsa. Elsa wasn't that far away from us, and there were no impacts across the Panhandle whatsoever from Elsa. So any shift to the west, or to the east rather, and we're talking about that. Shifts to the west, and we bring in more significant impacts across the entirety of the area. Now, again, we're still talking about a narrow band on the eastern side of this system that is going to be impactful. Everyone else probably kind of twiddling their thumbs and going, yeah, this wasn't much of a storm. So that's really what we're looking at as far as the range of possibilities go. This is your friendly reminder that every storm is different. Do not compare storms. Even if you had identical storms with identical metrics and they came in at different angles, you would have different outcomes for your locations. So there's no point in thinking back to a past storm and all of you saying, we had Michael, we don't need another one. That's who I'm talking to. There's no point in even doing that, because the comparison is just not going to be there ever. There's never ever going to be another storm that is identical to Michael, that goes in the identical location, that is identical to everything that you experienced with that. Could there be another intense storm? Sure, absolutely. But there's never going to be one that is identical to that. Every storm has their own problems, their own complications, their own issues. That's why you always want to focus on your impacts in your areas and make your plans according to those impacts. Because obviously, even in this forecast, we're talking about the eastern half of the area and the western half of the area experiencing two separate types of events, even with this small system. And you'll notice here I do have the yellow highlighting the path where the center is most likely to go. The reason that that path is off to the east side of where they have it projected is because that's where most of the operational models take it. So the majority of the modeling is actually in that yellow, not in the center of the cone. And that's also probably where we're most likely going to see the most significant impacts as well.
Yeah, so this is definitely something to watch over the next coming day and a half, when we should have a little bit more of an idea of what exactly is going to happen with this system. We'll take a look at some more analysis here as we show the track and where some of the stronger rain totals will be. And as Ross has just pointed out, it's really going to be on the eastern half of this storm where we'll see anything. And that's obvious through much of the peninsula. It's picking up on the heaviest rainfall. So here in the Panhandle, based off the current forecast track, we could see anywhere from, say, an inch in around the Panama City area to possibly 2.5 inches on the east side. Further west, could see maybe like 1/10 of an inch. So we're talking about really drastic conditions from west to east. And again, it's going to be dependent on where exactly the right side that storm sets up. So if the storm pushes further towards the west, then we could pick up even more rainfall across the Panhandle because we'll be on the eastern band. However, if the storm's further towards the east, then these rain totals are going to be a lot less likely. So here's a look at the European model, one of the models that we look at that is showing that northerly track in and around the Big Bend area, picking up the highest rainfall totals in and around Tallahassee. Could see around 3.5 to possibly 4 to 5 inches of rain. But notice on the west side, where most of our area is drastically different, an inch or less of rainfall. And again, the European model is actually keeping the storm to be a little bit stronger. So say maybe a Category 1 hurricane as it comes through the Big Bend would produce higher rainfall totals on the east side. Meanwhile, the GFS, the American model, has been trending a bit weaker as it develops and pushes, say, around the peninsula and then back out into the Gulf as a very weak tropical low. And as a result, that's going to possibly lead to much less significant rainfall, even all across the area, even though there's more likely to be more rain on the east side of the storm. With this model, because it's a weaker tropical system, rainfall totals all across the area will be much less, around 2 inches or less. And obviously, as you can look through Panama City and towards Destin and Phoenix Springs, we're looking at maybe 1/2 inch or less. So there's still definitely some discrepancies across our model bias, dependent on where exactly the storm system is forecast to go, as well as how strong it's going to be. But that we're just showing you different options of what could actually happen and how you should start to prepare.
Yeah, I think this brings into focus a pretty good idea of the fact of just how narrow we're talking about the band being, and the Euro there showing possibly the strongest solution out of any of the models at the moment, showing about a Category 1 hurricane, at least by pressure. That doesn't mean that the wind field would necessarily match the pressure, but by pressure showing about a Category 1 moving toward the bend. So the biggest significant impacts would be just on the east side of that circulation, possibly up through Tallahassee and even further in. But again, that goes back to just how track dependent this is going to be. Any shifts to the west, and that brings more significant impacts to the rest of the Panhandle, and not just, say, the far eastern tip of Franklin County, which is where we would be forecasting the most significant impacts at the moment. Now, any shifts off to the east, and we're talking the opposite. We're talking about almost nothing happening across the rest of the Panhandle. So this is going to be extremely track dependent, which is why you want to check back. But at least we now know the range of possibilities for our area. And we do know that we are going to be close enough to this system that we have to keep a very close eye on it, and we know what we should prepare for. So I would highly advise that everyone just mentally prepare and be prepped for a Category 1 hurricane as we go Sunday night into Monday, but most likely with the understanding that we're likely going to see something very weak with minor impacts. But it's better to be prepared than the other way around and be caught by surprise, because I certainly can see a surprise factor with this storm. Never anything that you really want to see. This is the European model, and it does show the wind swath. So you'll note that the strongest winds do remain offshore. And even in the scenario where we're talking about a Category 1 making its way toward the bend, you're still talking about the most significant winds happening in Franklin and Wakulla counties, possibly 40, 45, maybe 50, 55, or even 60 mile per hours. That would be the highest that we would see. So I wanted to show worst case scenario here with the European model because that's what you should mentally prep for. So even if we see a significant storm, at least in the range of possibilities here, we're talking about possibly 45 to 50 mile per hour winds being the max across the area. So Again, extremely track dependent. I know the cone is scary, but the overall model ranges here have trended much, much weaker. And we should get more clarity as we do go through the next couple of days, really today. Into tonight and into tomorrow morning, because that's going to give us an idea of when we get redevelopment of this system and exactly what this system does. Now, I'm going to go backwards here until we get back to Fred, so just bear with me for a second as I do go backwards through all of these slides. But yeah, I mean, what we're talking about overall here is that the possibilities at least are in our favor for the most part. There is some westerly shear today, and I think we're going to continue to see where they are tracking the center to kind of wobble back and forth until we get a low-level center to redevelop. And until we get a low-level center to redevelop, we really won't know what the in solution is going to be here, because the models are guessing from the from the actual initiation point. So when they initialize, because we're showing the mid-level circulation as being the low-level center, the models are guessing at that. So they're projecting out from a start of a guess, which is never what you want from the models. You want the models to know exactly what's happening at this moment and exactly what the storm looks like, as opposed to the guess aspect of it. So we should start to see more clarity with the models. They should start to come in line over the next 12 hours, and hopefully we'll be able to say, okay, this area is going to see this and this area is going to see that. But we do have a good range of possibilities to narrow in on as we do go through the next day. So at least we're able to give some details today, because yesterday it was like, yeah, just wait. Yeah. Like, we don't really know yet. So now that we have the storm on the other side of Hispaniola, we're just waiting for the storm to redevelop. And it does, honestly, it doesn't look terrible as far as circulation goes and what I expected it to look like. Is it healthy? No. But it's got a decent amount of circulation still with it, and there is some convection around it. You can see that westerly shear starting to show up as that convection flares up, everything going off to the north and east on those cloud tops. So that is the shear that will likely keep this relatively weak. And it's going to be dealing with that all the way until it gets into our area, because that upper low is hanging out right over the top of us, which is why we have the showers and storms out there now. So if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm going to scroll through the comment section here, post them to whatever comment section you were watching, and hopefully if we haven't already addressed it, we'll be able to answer those questions. I think I saw somebody that's watching from Tampa.
I was going to say, like, if you're watching and you're not maybe in the Panhandle, or you don't live here full time, maybe you're watching because you have a vacation planned for this weekend or also next week, I wouldn't say this is like cancel your plans weather, would you, Ross?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, even if you're coming down and we have a Category 1 and you're going to a hotel or whatever, it's just a bad weather day.
Just ride it out in the hotel.
We're talking about by Tuesday afternoon, we're going back to the summer pattern. So we're talking about one bad weather day. That's certainly not enough for you to cancel your plans. I would mention that if you are planning on traveling down, please, please, please take the Gulf very, very seriously, because we are going to see rip currents out there, and we definitely will see wave heights increase. And not necessarily Saturday may be a bright sunny day, and you may want to get on the beach. And if our waves are slowly increasing throughout the day on Saturday, we could have dangerous Gulf conditions at that point in time. So know the flag system, know what rip currents are. If you don't, we have a handy dandy video on our website that you can watch. It's about 5 minutes long, and it will give you all the information you need on not only how to identify a rip current, but also how to survive a rip current if you happen to find yourself in one. It is information that everyone should know, and I mean literally everyone. If you're going to step a toe in the water, you should know what a rip current is and how to get out of one. And definitely how to identify one, because it's important for you to know, and it's important for maybe somebody else who might not know on the beach, that you could say, hey, look, there's a rip current right there. Don't get in the water there. Yep. So those are important things, and I think that will be an impact to our area, regardless of whether we have a storm intensify or not, because there is going to be wind in the Gulf of Mexico, so we will eventually increase some wave heights, even if it's just up to 3 to 4 feet. We will be talking about rip currents for at least a couple of days. Now, by Wednesday, north wind, back to the summer pattern, probably done with the rip currents. But I would say that, possibly Sunday, maybe starting Saturday, possibly Sunday and Monday being days where the Gulf might be closed, and then seeing it reopen as we go into Tuesday, but maybe still dangerous. And then by Wednesday, we're probably talking about normal conditions. So I certainly wouldn't cancel any plans based off of the current projections of the storm. So I think that is a good point. And the reason I said I think somebody's watching from Tampa, because they're talking about red tide. Yeah, red tide, actually, systems like this do help mitigate red tide because you're adding a lot of fresh water, and that fresh water will help to disperse the materials that are in the water that are helping algae bloom, because that's what red tide is. It's an algae. It's a bacteria that attaches itself to algae and it grows with stagnant water conditions, warm water conditions, as well as the right nutrients. So mixing the water up does help to reduce red tide. I will caution that back in 2018, when we had Gordon before Michael, we had Tropical Storm Gordon that actually pulled some of the red tide from the St. Pete area up the coast. So it can also move the red tide as well. So, you know, red tide's kind of, you just wait until it's gone kind of thing. There's really not any rhyme or reason for why it disappears, or when it disappears. It just, you kind of have to wait until the water temperature starts to cool off a little bit and that algae is just not blooming anymore. But good question there. Let's see here.
I got one from Gustavo on Facebook.
Go for it.
Here you go, right here. Can you read that?
Yes. Do we need to be aware also for tornadoes and a lot of flooding? So based off of the current predictions and the flooding forecast, even just rainfall totals, it doesn't look to be like a big concern for the flooding. It's going to be those tropical rain bands that come through that we'll have to watch. If they do train and continually impact the same area, that's where there will be a flooding concern, just because there will be a lot of rain falling over the same area for a long time. That could lead to a potential to see some flash flooding, but it doesn't look to be a widespread flooding threat because the amount of rain totals for the Panhandle does not look too significant. We're really looking at the most maybe 3 inches on the higher end, really less than that. And as far as it comes to tornadoes, if we see the storm tracking further towards the west and we'll be on the east side of the storm, that's where it looks like the most impacts are going to be. So we'll likely see those tropical rain bands then coming over our area of the Panhandle. And with those tropical rain bands, we can't completely rule out tropical isolated tornadoes. So again, if the path continues to shift towards the west and we're on the east side of the storm, that's where we'll have to watch out for not only potential to see some flash flooding within those tropical rain bands that track over the same area for a long period of time, but also potential to see some isolated tropical tornadoes that will likely be very brief, spin up typical of a tropical system. If it shifts towards the east and all of that is no longer really in the forecast for us here in the Panhandle, it'll move more so over northern Florida. So again, it's possible, it's just very much so dependent on the track.
Yeah, I would say right now with where it is projecting, if it does follow the center of the cone, we would not be concerned about tornadoes here. It is the eastern half of the system, and more times than not, if you go back and watch our quadrants video, it is the northeast quadrant that we see the majority of tornadoes spin up in, as well as the southeast quadrant. You can also get them there, but most of the time you want a little bit of dry air, and you want a slightly stronger, bigger system so that you can get those feeder bands a little bit spread apart so some dry air can work in there. Tornadoes aren't as readily available to the atmosphere as many think they are. They are kind of finicky. So you need a lot of shear, which you definitely have during tropical systems. You need a little bit of dry air, and then you need some instability into the mid-levels. With tropical weather, you don't really worry about the moisture because most of the column from the surface up to the cloud is moist. So that's why we can have tropical spin-ups, as we like to refer to them as, that really drop down, maybe are on the ground for 5 minutes and then dissipate because you lose that little bit of ability for the storm to sustain it. So, you know, that's always a possibility when we're talking about tropical weather. But as Kristen said, if we are on the western side of the system as projected now, or even in the center of the system, then tornadoes really won't be an issue. It's going to be if we see a significant shift to the west. So we really need this to be more of a Destin, Fort Walton type of landfall for tornadoes to become more of an issue across our area. As it is forecasted now, I'd say the bend really from probably Jefferson County and then further off to the east back to Perry, and even further east than that, that's where we would be talking about tornadoes. Certainly, if you're watching from the peninsula, yeah, as this storm is passing off to your west, pay attention to those outside bands because they will likely be producing tornadoes across the peninsula. So yeah, I think that that is a concern in that area. But for us here in the Panhandle, the main concern is going to be that center of circulation and then just on the eastern side of where that track actually does end up going. Those feeder bands, probably not much of an issue for us unless it ends up being much further off to the west. So that's a good question there. What else?
Anything else over there, Spencer?
Not that I'm seeing, just kind of, a lot of comparisons to Michael, but
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think we already hit on that, but if you just joined us, hit on it again.
This is not a Michael storm.
No, this is not a Michael storm, and I know many people are like, well, they were forecasting Michael to be weak to start off with, and it moved over the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, but Michael moved into a perfect environment. So you're not incorrect in saying that the forecast was weak to start off, because it was definitely weak to start off with. But Michael moved into the Gulf of Mexico, where the Gulf of Mexico was absolutely prime for intensification. That's not the case here because we're going to have an upper low sitting directly over the top of us. So this system will be dealing with westerly shear through the entire trek of the Gulf of Mexico. That doesn't mean that it can't intensify. It just means that it is likely going to be slightly east side lopsided. It's going to be a small system, and most likely we're not talking about rapid intensification here. We're talking about slow intensification from really the Florida Straits and the Keys all the way up into our area if it stays over water. Now, if there's an increase in wind shear at all or some dry air gets into it, then that's also going to cap intensification. So the reason that we look at those model intensities is because they give us a good idea of the range of possibilities here. And if you'll think back to when we did have Michael, we were saying RI is possible the entire time, and that's RI standing for rapid intensification. So even though it was initially forecasted to be weak, we were saying rapid intensification is possible. Here, rapid intensification, sure, it's possible, not likely. So no, I wouldn't compare this to Michael by any states of the word. And again, you should never compare storms because every storm is different. Every single storm is different. You can go over to Lake Charles, Louisiana, and ask them the difference between Delta and Laura, and I guarantee you every single person will have a different story on those two storms, because even though they were similar in size and strength, they had different impacts in different areas. And this would be the same kind of thing for any storm in the future. It's not, there's never, ever, ever going to be another Michael that happens exactly the same way that Michael happened. It'll never happen again. Just like there'll never be another Katrina, there'll never be another Harvey, there'll never be another Charlie, there'll never be another Andrew, because they're all different storms. They all have different impacts. They all have different complications with them. So yeah, rant over.
Okay, I have a question from Eddie Burrows on Facebook saying, when can we expect rain from Fred? Depending on the track of the system again, but the timing looks to be pretty consistent over the past couple of days, where we're looking at this to be around a Saturday or a Sunday night, trend into Monday that will really see the biggest impacts if we get any of those impacts for our area. So our rainfall forecast will probably pick up Sunday, maybe at the earliest in the afternoon, certainly continuing overnight into much of the day on Monday if we get some of those rain bands to come through our area. But if you have weekend plans, Saturday probably going to be just a typical summertime day with those pop-up showers and storms. Most of the day on Sunday is probably going to be the same as well. It's not until the evening hours that we'll get those showers and storms to at least come in on our eastern half of the area as the storm gets closer to the Panhandle and then tracks through for most of the day on Monday. Now, if you're joining us and you want a recap, we are going to have this video available for you to watch in its whole entirety, as well as any other updates on our Tropic Topics page. Ross and I are also doing a specific tracking Fred article on our website. It should be pinned to our homepage, so you can get those updates on every shift. So I'm updating it in the morning. Ross is updating it in the evening. So with the very latest that is coming out from not only the models, but in communication with the National Hurricane Center, as well as our forecasting, all the latest, kind of similar to this breakdown, is how we've operated that forecast article for you. So check back and check back often. You can get our forecast, of course, on News 13, on the website, streaming. We have multiple ways for you to get information. And make sure you are also following us on Facebook, Twitter. Ross posts a lot to Instagram as well. I mean, basically anywhere you can find it. And our Storm Track 13 app has great resources as well. It's essentially gives you all the information that you can get on our website, and on the radar you can overlay the forecasting cone from the National Hurricane Center too, and have that immediate information all on our app, all in your pocket or on your mobile devices.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and we're going to continue to do updates just as Kristen said in every shift, and coincidentally and not, Kristen will actually be here on Saturday and I will be here on Sunday, so you will have more information being updated as we go, not only through the weekend and up to this storm, but obviously each shift with our regular updates, but also on social. We are planning to do little special Tropic topics for you. Kristen will have one in the morning, and TBD on the time there. It may be around the similar time that we do here. It could be during her break between shifts. So that's really up to her. So you'll have to follow her on social to find out about that. But yes, we will also have that posted out. And we will have any information that comes up that's new that gives us a better look at what's going on with the storm. We're going to continue to update you on that as well. So there are plenty of ways to get updates. And I will also do a special Tropic Topics tomorrow evening as we go into the evening hours, where I will come in and we'll do a quick breakdown and we'll talk about questions and things like that. But they're just going to be updates. It's not going to be full format like what we're doing now. It's just going to be a general update like, hey, this is what we're looking at. These are the possibilities. This is the storm, and that's going to be it. So we're not going to do this long form type of question and answer. It's just going to be a general update as to what the storm is, because believe it or not, we have a lot to do. So
We do have shows. Yeah.
we do have other things to do. But yes, we're going to continue to update you, and obviously I'll check all of those things. The Storm Track 13 app is just absolutely phenomenal, especially in cases where we have significant weather coming in. So I would highly, highly suggest that if you don't have that, go ahead and download it, because you can track the tropics on there. It has all the tropical maps that we've shown, has the spaghetti models on there, which may or may not have been too much of a help on this storm. But yeah, all of that is there, so make sure that you go check that out and continue to follow up with us. But I think that's going to do it. I don't see any other significant questions on here other than what we just answered, which was, you know, what are we talking about as far as updates, that kind of stuff. So
I think that's a wrap for this Thursday. Again, stay with us on Facebook, Twitter, all the social media platforms, our website, and also watching News 13 in the evening and mornings. We're going to have all the updates for you, get you prepared. Don't panic. This is something to watch and be prepared for, as we do know now at least the range of the system. We are either going to get nothing or we could get a Category 1 hurricane. And again, we'll be updating you and giving you the best information possible. But now is the time to be prepared, especially as we're heading closer into the peak of hurricane season.